Chapter 15, Escape to England. Traveling along the coast as swiftly as possible, we at length reached the vicinity of Scheveningen. Out on the sand dunes, a night's walk from the village, we were startled and made horribly afraid by finding a long pole and, hanging from the top, a dead man swaying a little in the wind. His head hung, heavily drooping forward. One arm swung helplessly. He was bound to the pole with ropes. His was a ghastly figure. Some long, torn portion of his raiment was swinging down from his shoulder. Ropes were about his neck and his drooping shoulders, his knees, and one ankle. One hand was tied to his side. The other arm, as I said, was swaying, and his head, as far as we could judge in the uncertain light, had been partly crushed by a heavy stone or instrument. His ghastly form seemed almost to come to life before our eyes, the effect, doubtless, of the moving arm and swaying portion of his attire. He had evidently been dead for days, although at first, thinking him alive from his motion, we had spoken to him. But we spoke to the dead. We hurried past, feeling that the sand dunes were well known to our enemies. We could not doubt that he who hung there had been slain on account of his religion. I looked back fearfully and saw him swaying, a dark, startling form, fading out against the gray sky. "If we hasten, we may reach Scheveningen before day," said Gaspar. "Will anyone remember us?" asked Thyra. "Will anyone take us in?" Nevertheless, when we saw the fishing boats of Scheveningen drawn up on the beach as of old, and when we saw the church spire dark above the dunes, we cried out for joy and ran over the sands. We reached the city at last, though it seemed as if sand dune after sand dune would intervene. We hastened up a narrow lane and hid ourselves. Finally, we ventured to a house that we had once known. Despite the years of prison life, the fisherwoman knew us and took us in immediately. And here, for the first, I heard news of Stephen. The woman remembered him and his mother, and assured us that they had without doubt gone to England soon after the time of our flight. "And you, have you been there and been banished?" she asked. We told her the story of our wanderings, and she was pitiful, but doubted whether we three could leave the Low Countries unperceived. "The eyes of the inquisitors and of your enemies are quick to see," she whispered. "Their eyes may be holden, that they may not know us," answered Gaspar, undismayed. And so did he encourage me by his words, that I said to Thyra when we were alone together, "I think we shall see England and Stephen before long." But Thyra only threw herself into my arms and wept as if she would never be done. And I could not comfort her, knowing right well that Stephen must count her as dead, and if he had wedded another, it was but human and manlike that he should have done so. Moreover, she had definitely refused him, because he would not dare to follow his highest convictions. Yet I, who am a woman and know a woman's heart, pitied my sister Thyra. Notwithstanding, she said never a word why she wept. 1551 AD. But though we tried continually to find passage to England, so fearful were we of discovery by our enemies, it was not till September that we effected our escape. It was a gray, dark September night, when we and a man, who also said that he wished to go to England, went out of Scheveningen. We had much hope that a vessel of which we had heard would bear us to the land we sought. The vessel was to lie by for us at a certain point, which we were to reach in a small boat. We had come to the outermost edge of the dunes in safety, when out of the night and the sands 4 men appeared and pursued us. We succeeded in escaping them in the darkness, but we were so driven out of our course that we hardly knew what to do. The man who was with us, named Johannes, had professed to us that he was an Anabaptist also. But I began to doubt him, for while we fled from our pursuers, I thought I had heard him call back something that seemed as if he were in league with them. Yet he had continued running with us, and now stood beside us, thanking God that we had escaped. I knew not what to think. After a time, we ventured back to the place where our small boat had been secreted. Finding no one to oppose us, we entered the boat and pushed off, hidden by the darkness. When we had rowed a distance, the man Johannes suddenly sprang to his feet, struck Gaspar a violent blow with an oar, and attempted to throw him overboard. The men grappled fiercely in the darkness. The waves were tossing the boat, and swayed by the struggles of the men, it careened from one side to the other, till it seemed as though it would capsize. Thyra and I grasped Johannes, trying to keep him from dealing Gaspar such blows. But we were little against the hypocrite's strength. He was furious, having evidently thought his power sufficient to overcome Gaspar without difficulty. But my husband, despite his prison experiences, still retained much of the strength with which he had formerly faced the North Sea. Johannes dealt Gaspar a mighty blow, and half pushed him overboard. Another instant, and the hypocrite's purpose would be achieved. But Gaspar, recovering himself, smote Johannes, and immediately the boat capsized, and we were all thrown into the sea. There was an awful interval of struggling to catch hold of the boat. I grasped it and looked around. The night and the waves hid all. I heard a voice beside me, Gaspar's voice, though what he said the waves dashed from me. Thyra! I screamed, striving to pierce the dark with my eyes. Had she gone down? And where was Johannes the traitor? Gaspar! Cried a faint voice through the wash of waves. We shouted back. I am safe, cried Thyra. I have caught an oar. I can swim. She came closer. But where was Johannes? We called aloud, but the waves only answered us. We clung to the boat and drifted, calling till we felt we must not lose our strength shouting. Johannes had returned no cry. Yet I felt as if any instant he might seize and try to drown me. We floated and swam, holding the boat till after being in the water for more than an hour, we succeeded in reaching the shore quite a distance beyond Scheveningen. Here we righted the boat and drew it on the sands. All our provisions and little possessions had sunk when the boat was overturned. Everything we had provided was gone. We lay on the sands exhausted. Midnight must be past. The vessel on which we were to sail was to wait for us, if necessary, till near morning, but no longer. Gaspar sat up. "I must return to Scheveningen and find help," he murmured. "I am too weak to row to the ship." With that, he fell back on the sand and answered no more, though I spoke to him. In alarm, Thyra and I tried to lift him, but his head hung back helplessly. His heart beat still. Oh, how I longed for light that I might see his face. If, when he was in the water, he had swooned like this, what should we have done? I could not comprehend why he did not revive now. But daylight came faintly at last, and then Thyra and I cried out, for it was blood as well as water that made his left sleeve wet. Pulling bare his arm, I found a knife cut, not deep indeed, but bleeding yet. "That traitor, Johannes, had a knife," groaned Thyra as we bound the arm. After a while, Gaspar revived enough to tell us that we must reach Scheveningen before morning. He tried to walk, though he was still so weak that we supported him as well as we could. We were obliged to stop often for rest, but continued till by the time morning fully came, we had reached Scheveningen and found shelter with our kind friend. Now, whether Johannes the traitor struck on his own knife when the boat capsized, or whether he went down among those waves, I cannot tell. But I know that during our stay of 10 days after this in Scheveningen, that man, who had pretended to be an Anabaptist, was never seen. After 10 days, we went forth again, 2 of the Scheveningen fishermen being with us, and lying in the bottom of the fishing boat, concealed by an old sail. We were brought by our friends to a ship that was to bear us to England. But I have never doubted that Johannes was one of those informers whom Charles V, in his edict of 1550, encouraged to betray heretics into the hands of the inquisitors. It is true, we had almost no goods, the possession of which Johannes might have been rewarded for his treachery. But perhaps he looked for reward elsewhere, if he could but take us prisoners. It was doubtless his intention also to reveal to our enemies the name of the kind friend who sheltered us in Scheveningen. The edict had forbidden anyone to lodge a heretic or furnish him with food, fire, or clothing. But I have little doubt that the waves of the North Sea covered both Johannes and his evil purposes. Tossing in our ship, we thanked God for his protection in the past. It seemed wonderful that we were really out of the Low Countries at last, and even in the waves of this sea, there was a feeling of security. The God who had kept us through so many perils owned this ocean, held us and it in the hollow of his hand, and could bring us unto our desired haven, no matter what the will of our enemies might be. One day, my husband came to me with beaming face. "Editha," he said eagerly, "I have a Dutch Testament again." In the ship on which we were, we had found numerous fleeing Anabaptists. It was from one of these men that Gaspar had obtained his testament, and I was very thankful he could do so, for English testaments might be more numerous in England than Dutch ones, and there is nothing like one's own home tongue. Incredible as it might seem, considering the experiences through which we had passed, I still had my old, worn English Testament, though surely I would have lost it before this had I not always made a practice of carrying the book concealed inside my dress. Stained with seawater and faded with much reading, that New Testament was dearer to me than any newer copy that England might hold, for my old book seemed the only link left to bind me to the days when my father and my mother were alive. But, oh, when the shores of England came in sight, what a weeping arose among us all. Many wept for joy, crying out that the land of religious freedom was before us. One Anabaptist, a cripple through the tortures inflicted, and whose wife had been buried in the land we left, sobbed aloud and blessed the young boy, King Edward, who allowed his subjects to read the word. But Anabaptists might perhaps not be welcome for all that. Most of us were bound for Norwich, which another King Edward had once made the home of many persons from the Low Countries, and where we were to hear that England was not such a land of religious freedom after all. Yet England, to many of those who wept, did not mean what it did to me. It was my homeland. And were Stephen and my aunt still in Norwich? That had been a place without its martyrdom for conscience sake. And Gaspar and I talked of Thomas Bilney, who years before this had, after recanting and suffering greatly in spirit because of that recantation, obtained grace of God, and coming to Norwich preached in the fields, confessing his past weakness and warning all men to beware by him, and never to trust their fleshly friends in matters of religion. He gave one of Tyndale's New Testaments to a converted nun, was arrested, put into prison, and afterward burned. I thought of Thomas Bilney when at last our weary journey ended and our company entered into the old town of Norwich. Would other flames for other martyrs ever blaze in these fields? Would Anabaptists be safe in England? It was a solemn question to us, for we had just heard that though Bible reading had been restored, yet it must be that King Edward was against the Anabaptists. For when he had issued his general pardon in the end of December of the year before, he had not included the Anabaptists. That did not look like safety or like religious toleration. Yet Gaspar and Thyra and I found temporary shelter and set ourselves to weaving with great diligence, hoping that peace might be granted to us. We heard nothing of Stephen or my aunt. One day, Thyra came in with a face so white that on my glancing up from my weaving, I asked her what the matter was. She made me but little answer, and I was busy and did not question. After a few days, I began to notice that whenever we were out in the street, and some of the black-robed Benedictine friars of the place went by, or whenever one such monk passed our home, Thyra would look earnestly, as if she half thought to see someone. But I did not understand till one day, in a narrow, winding street, I came face to face with a thin, weary-looking Benedictine friar, whose black robe only added to his sorrowful appearance. "Stephen! Stephen!" I cried, springing forward. I could not but know him, though as I gazed, the resemblance seemed to fade. He looked at me with hollow eyes that dropped their lids before the recognition in my face. "I am Brother Barnabas," he murmured, drawing his black garments about him. I could see him tremble. He stepped forward as if to pass me. I caught a fold of his black garb. "You are Stephen, my cousin Stephen," I asserted. "Where is my aunt? Why are you a monk?" The slight black figure bent its head and stood quivering. "My mother is with the dead," he replied at last. "When I returned to England, I became a monk at my mother's earnest request. I am Brother Barnabas. If you are risen from the dead to break my heart with past memories, let me tell you, a monk has no heart. Let me pass." But I clung to his black robe. "You are Stephen, Stephen, my cousin," I repeated. "Stephen, who used to go with me to see the one-winged angel. Stephen, who used to listen with me to my aunt's tales of the saints. Stephen, who fled with us and who lived with us on the Trekskit and learned to read the New Testament. Stephen, who believed the Anabaptists to be right and yet dared not risk his life by becoming one of that sect. Stephen, whom Thyra—" A groan broke from the figure beside me. His face was muffled in his black robe. "A monk has no heart?" "Oh, Editha," groaned his voice, "if she had lived." "She has," I answered sternly. "Thyra and Gaspar and I are alive. All those persons who follow God's word and their consciences do not die, whatever men's threats may be. You might have been an Anabaptist and yet be more alive than you seem." I spoke plainly, for my heart was hot when I thought of his cowardice, and that he had not even given me a fitting greeting after all these years of separation. But I forgave him everything, for he fell at my feet and broke into such sobbing that if the narrow little street had not been a somewhat unused one, we would have attracted attention. It was not Brother Barnabas who knelt at my feet. It was my cousin Stephen, whose sorrows I had soothed when we were children. Yet I made no effort to comfort him now. Though he should weep long, his tears could not efface the years of loneliness that Thyra had endured because of his cowardice, nor could efface the years in which, to please his mother, he had lived a life that he must have known to be a false one. And yet, as I looked upon him sobbing there, I thought that at least the Romish Church had done one thing. Stephen was a monk, and therefore unmarried. Yet, what availed that now? Was it likely that this weak man had courage now to become an Anabaptist, after being bound more tightly than ever to the church of his mother's faith? And Thyra, had she seen him in this Benedictine garb? Stephen rose to his feet. "I am Brother Barnabas," he said brokenly. "The past is over. I am a monk. My dying mother charged me to remain one no matter how England's religion might change." And with a swift sign of the cross, he went away from me so quickly that I could not stay him. I did not know whether to tell Thyra or not. But I told Gaspar, and one evening he brought Brother Barnabas home to us. By what persuasion my husband did so, I know not. Neither do I know what Thyra said to Stephen, for my husband and I left them to speak to each other as they would. But this I know, that nevermore was Brother Barnabas seen to wear the garb of the Benedictine monks of Norwich. There was a stir among the monks for a time, and we thought it advisable for Stephen to hide from them. But this was a Protestant land under King Edward's power, and men who would have burned Stephen under another ruler now felt it wise to appear favorable themselves toward Protestantism. But Protestantism is not Anabaptism, and I feared for my cousin's life after he was baptized. For he did become an Anabaptist, great as was the danger, and I think he truly repented of the manner in which he had allowed his mother to sway his conscience. Yet I cannot deny that my cousin was a weak man, though a Christian, and I was glad the day when I saw Thyra married to him, for I trusted that her strong faith and belief would uphold him, and that he would, like many another man, be built up in the gospel by his wife's influence. Yet, for fear of any revenge from the Benedictine friars, Stephen and his wife left us for a time and went to Sandwich to live, thinking it more safe. So, Gaspar and I were left alone, but not for very long. God gave to us another baby boy, and when I kissed our little one, I could not keep from weeping, for I remembered his brother's curly head and the warm baby arms that had encircled my neck before the Spanish soldier snatched my darling from me. Yet my little Hendrik was in heaven, safe with my father and my mother, I believed. We named this boy Eliezer because of the meaning of that word, to whom God is help. If the child finds life such a thing as his father and mother have found it, he will have need of God's help, said Gaspar, reverently and uncomplainingly. We will teach the little lad where real help comes from in dark days, and we will teach him also to pray with us for religious freedom. I think I never saw a father love a child more than Gaspar loved this little English boy of ours. We hoped for peaceful days under King Edward, for we said to each other that when our young king grew older, he would see for himself that the Anabaptists were his loyal subjects, and would treat us kindly as the other Protestants. 1553 A.D. But when our little Eliezer was 6 months old, a great blow was given to our hopes, and we were thrown into a greatly unsettled state, not knowing what should befall us. Our 16-year-old King Edward died. During his reign, the images had been removed from the churches. The articles known as the Bloody Statute had been repealed, and the Reformation progressed in England. Would such things be under whomsoever came after him? Lady Jane Grey, poor woman, reigned for 10 days. Then Mary, daughter of Henry VIII, was set on the throne, and she caused Lady Jane Grey and her husband to be beheaded. Alas for the throne that is grasped by a bloody hand! Already we heard murmurings that our new queen was Catholic. In August, we were sure that a reaction had taken place in the government.
Gardiner was made Lord Chancellor the 23rd of August. He and that English prelate Bonner, who afterward showed himself so great a persecutor of the Protestants, were at the head of the government. I could see that Gaspar thought trouble at hand. Mary was not like her half-brother Edward. Even during his reign, Anabaptists had been burned. We heard, little by little, much that showed us that Mary was a firm papist. She had been persuaded to let King Edward's body be buried by Cranmer with the English service, but the same day had a requiem mass sung in Latin in the Tower, Gardiner wearing a mitre and performing the mass in the old popish form. Moreover, we heard that toward the end of August, Bishop Bonner restored the old service in St. Paul's Church in London, there being processions of priests, and Mass was also in Latin. We learned, too, that there was a great revival of Catholic doings among the Oxford folk, and we heard rumors of Catholic rejoicing and plotting against the Protestants. But worse was yet to come. We lived through that winter in a state of suspense. The next summer, a thing happened that crushed all hope. Queen Mary was married to that deadly foe of Anabaptists, Philip II, the son of that emperor whose dreadful power we had felt in the Low Countries, Charles V of Spain. "Oh, Gaspar," I cried, "the Spanish power will rule in England. We shall have the Inquisition here, as it was in the Low Countries. Oh, I never thought that Spain would reach across the sea. Woe unto us, Anabaptists! We shall never see religious freedom in England." But Gaspar, though he laid his hand on little Eleazar's head as if to keep the child from harm, answered steadily, "The Inquisition will not come to England. The English people hate the Spanish alliance too much for that." Yet, soon after Mary's marriage, persecution began more freely, and when November saw the declaration by Cardinal Pole that England and Rome were reconciled, and when in February John Rogers was burned, we prepared ourselves for the worst. 1555 A.D. I was greatly alarmed for Stephen and Thyra, from whom we had not heard for a long time. Surely now the monks would feel that they might take vengeance on the recreant Brother Barnabas. But when I thought of John Rogers' death by fire, he being the first man to die thus under the new queen's reign, I remembered something that Rogers had said when Edward was king. A Baptist woman named Joan Boucher, of high parentage, who had been accustomed to secretly bring copies of Tyndale's New Testament into King Henry's court, was after a while taken prisoner for heresy. Those who examined her reported to the young king that they had decreed her separation from the Lord's flock as a diseased sheep. Yet a time passed before sentence was pronounced. Ridley and Cranmer and Latimer, brave men though they were, afterward bravely undergoing death during Queen Mary's reign, yet did not believe in allowing freedom of thought and judgment about the Scriptures. And so at last the council issued a warrant to the Lord Chancellor to make out a writ for Joan Boucher's execution. Poor young King Edward did not want to give his signature to a document authorizing the killing of this woman. But Cranmer is said to have urged him to sign the document. King Edward hesitated. Cranmer said that by the law of Moses, blasphemers were to be stoned to death, and this woman was guilty of impiety in the sight of God. Impiety that a prince, as God's deputy, ought to punish. The poor young king, evidently thinking Cranmer believed that Joan Boucher was not a Christian, asked a solemn question. "My lord, will you send her soul to hell?" King Edward at last was compelled to yield, but he said, "If it be an error, you, my lord, shall answer it to God." So weeping, King Edward signed the document. John Rogers, too, thought that Joan Boucher ought to be put to death. And when someone said that it was cruel, Rogers stated that burning alive was no cruel death, but easy enough. So Joan Boucher, the Baptist, was burned at the stake in May 1550. And when, in February 1555, under Queen Mary's rule, John Rogers himself was burned at the stake, I wondered if he still thought that burning alive was no cruel death, but easy enough. Yet I do not doubt that Rogers and Cranmer and Ridley and Latimer were Christian men, and that they thought they did God service by burning Joan Boucher, though I think that when they met her afterward in heaven, they probably believed more in religious freedom than when on earth. It seemed that the Anabaptists were the only people in those days who did believe in religious freedom for all men. The Catholics wished religious freedom for themselves, and the Protestants for themselves, but both denied it to the Anabaptists. It was generally known that there were a great many Anabaptists in the kingdom. What would our new Queen Mary do? What would she do? She who believed and obeyed Rome so scrupulously that she had put off her coronation till she had received from Granvella, Bishop of Arras, the oil to be used in the ceremony. She was afraid that, owing to the estrangement that had existed between England and Rome, the English oil might have lost its virtue. But Philip, whom she married the year after her coronation, as I have said before, had something else to do besides introduce the Inquisition into England. In the autumn of this same year of his marriage, his father, Charles V, resigned the crown to him, and he was left to struggle with the problem of quelling Protestantism and stamping out all Anabaptism in the Low Countries. A goodly problem that was, but Philip perhaps thought he could solve it. "Better not reign at all," he was wont to say, "than reign over heretics." One thing puzzled us. A Spanish friar, Alfonso de Castro, who was Philip's confessor, preached a sermon immediately after the first martyrs were burned at Smithfield, England. The friar spoke bitterly against such burnings. He denounced them as contrary to the spirit of Christianity, which is charity and forgiveness, and which teaches its ministers not to take vengeance on the sinner, but to enlighten him as to his errors and bring him to repentance. Now, we knew not what to think, for we could hardly believe that the Spanish friar would dare speak this way without Philip's permission. And yet we did not believe, judging from the conduct of Philip's father and from what we knew about Philip himself, that he was so very much shocked by those Smithfield burnings. The burning of heretics in England could not shock him so much more than the burning of them in Spain. And so we concluded that perhaps Philip, seeing that many people in England were shocked by the martyrdoms, thought that he would free himself from any suspicion in regard to them, and so induced his confessor to preach that sermon. However it was, Gaspar and I, notwithstanding many alarms, stayed quietly in Norwich for the period of Queen Mary's reign, always on the alert, always knowing that before nightfall of any day we might be imprisoned and condemned. Our Queen's reign seemed drenched in blood. What would it matter to her if Gaspar and I were added to the list of victims? We were only Anabaptists. But in spite of the cruelties of her reign, I cannot doubt that Mary was sincere in her religious professions. She was always ready to sacrifice her own interests whenever she thought that the interests of what she believed to be religion demanded it. She persisted in restoring the Catholic Church property, which in the past had been confiscated to the use of the crown. Mary's ministers remonstrated. "The crown is too impoverished to admit of it," stated they, when they knew her plan of relinquishing that portion of her revenue. "I would rather lose 10 crowns," answered Mary, "than place my soul in peril." So does Rome deceive the heart and blind the eyes of the one who is taught of her. And still, through these years of blood, the Baptists of England, miscalled Anabaptists, prayed God to send religious liberty. It seemed at times as if our prayers were all forgotten. And the Anabaptists of the Low Countries were praying too. Were all our prayers to be unanswered? Ah, the God of religious freedom was treasuring up those prayers. In his time, he would answer his suffering people. The end of chapter 15.